All right, welcome back to Casual Disasters. This is episode 5. I have Jacqui on today, a local mental health therapist and your weightlifter, wine pouring extraordinaire, and now going to be an author. And have written a book or.
I wrote a book. I'm working on the publishing part, which is really hard, come to find out. It's not this like fluid process. It's a
Yeah,
lot to do. So working on that. I've had several rejections already, um, but I wrote a book.
that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
I want to, unpack all of that today because I've never written a book. And that process of being in Spokane, I'm always like, how do people become authors here? But also, I found out something that's really cool in this library. Are you aware of this like writing center here? With
No.
this would be huge for what you're doing. She's a local author and has written several books. I can't think of her name right now, but she was on Lilac City Live, that kind of talk show that's hosted in the library, and she specifically was like presenting or whatever, one of the talk people that night, and she has written books, and then she like runs this part of the library where it's like a resource for anyone. You can sign up to have time with her,
Oh,
and she
that'd be cool.
helps potential writers, authors in Spokane like through that process.
That would be awesome. I could probably use help on figuring out the whole business end of writing is not the part that I was prepared for. I was prepared to do the writing part, and even that was really hard. But publishing is like it's the business part, the part that they want to know you're sellable. And so it's not as easy as like I wrote a book and now I want it published.
Yeah, I I've had a couple of friends write books, and I've been curious about that. Like, how do you even get this published? And do you just, is it like music industry where you're like putting out information to editors or publishers and being like, I want this book out?
There's a couple different ways you can go about it. So I've taken a couple publishing seminars at this point because I'm like, what am I doing? Um, so traditional publishing is kind of the way I'd prefer to go. You do have to find an agent, and once an agent decides like, yes, this book is marketable, I think I can get this sold to a publishing company, they're kind of the liaison between, then you're great, you're golden. But it takes a lot of like pitching and writing to them, persuading them that your book is needed on the market. You also have to prove that you have a solid social media following, and has become a really big thing now that social media is a thing. A friend of mine published a book, his second book, and I asked him how he got his book published or how he got picked up. Told me it took him 7 years of bolstering up his social media, and then an agent picked him up. And I was like, 7 years, my God. So
That's so long.
that's a long time to go without like having anything happen. But it is the business part. And once a publisher picks you up, then they like do everything. They'll give you an editor. They'll do all the marketing part of it. They'll design your cover and your font and and then get the book out there. Self-publishing is a totally different thing. It's you do all of that work. So you would need to hire your own editor. You would design your own cover. You would purchase the little like code on the back of the book with the ISBN number.
Yeah.
You purchase that. You purchase
Whoa.
your right to the Library of Congress, like all of it. And you pick the size you want your book to be, how many pages, and you market everything on your own. So you can do it. It's people do it all the time. They'll self-publish their books, but I would love to get picked up by a traditional publishing company and just go that route because that's a lot of work.
Yeah. One of my friends here, Scott Leeds, just had or got picked up to write like a series of books by an publishing company. And I swear he's been, when you said 7 years, I'm like, I think it's been even longer.
I
Like
believe
that
it.
process, like just getting even the interest in him as a writer.
Right? Like unless you have some kind of like clout or you're connected to somebody that is an author that can really promote your stuff, like they want to know like who's going to promote your stuff for you. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge right now.
I want to hear about what you're writing about.
So my book is I kind of call it like a journalistic memoir because I interview a lot of other folks in the process of writing about it, because it's not just an exclusive story to my own journey. Like, there were many of us that did what we call a discipleship school. And this was like something that started back in the 80s. Churches, evangelical churches in particular, started hosting and creating discipleship programs that were meant for young adults 18 to 25. So this was meant to be like what they would call your launching pad for the rest of your life. The way that you're going to get solid in your faith before you go out into the world. It was really meant to kind of like incubate you a little bit in your religious journey. And the hope was that like then you wouldn't lose your faith if you went to college afterwards, for instance. So anymore, I kind of see it as like an indoctrination school. But at the time, I thought it was going to be really, really rewarding. And I was there too long and ended up really harmed by the whole thing. So my book is about my whole journey through that, how I got there, why I got there, what happened in the program, what happened to others, and then my deconstruction and healing journey. And it took a long time to work through all of it, but...
What ages were you?
I was 20 when I went into the program, and then I left at 25.
And what were you doing in the program? Like, what was... I don't know. I'm so curious about that.
So Master's Commission is what it was called. It was a program I was familiar with. They had come to my home church. I'd seen these young adults doing their like ministry tours, and they would like dance and do dramas and skits and sing and whatever else. And I thought it was kind of cool. But I really wanted to go to college. Like, that was the thing I wanted to do. What ended up happening was my parents got divorced right before my senior year, and I just felt really lost. And it was a really hard divorce. And there were 5 of us, kids, six of us. I have 5 siblings, 6 children altogether. Everybody just kind of splintered, and I was the oldest. And so I just like bailed and got out. And then my high school boyfriend and I of 2 years broke up, and I was just so devastated. And it was a really ripe time for me to get picked up by the program. And when I had initially been approached about doing the program, I was not yet ready to commit to something like that. I was like, oh, there's a lot of rules. It's pretty strict. I don't think I want to give that much of my life to a program. And then everything fell apart, and I just was like, well, I guess I'll go do this program. I don't know what to do now. I'm not in college. My parents aren't helping with anything because they're just broken and dealing with their own lives. My high school boyfriend left me. Like, I am alone. And I think that was a big part of it, was I just felt really alone.
And were you hoping to be a minister, like a female pastor of sorts?
No. I had always been told I would be a great pastor's wife, but nothing about that like appealed to me.
Let me go to this program so I can find my future husband.
There was a lot of that too. A lot of people did find their spouse through the program. I think God did not find somebody in my program. They would have been all wrong for me in the long haul. Like, I'm not going to be the quiet, mousy, stay-at-home mom that many pastors want their wives to be. And yet I did this program that was like trying really hard to emphasize that kind of role.
Yeah.
Ugh.
That would be really, really difficult.
Oh, it's so gross when I think about it now, because that's just not my life.
Yeah, I was like, I don't even know the depth of your relationship currently, but you guys just don't give me that vibe.
No, Oscar did not grow up in the church like I did. So a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, he's like, what the fuck? And am I allowed to swear on this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. It's explicit.
Perfect. And it was helpful to hear his perspective being on the outside, like seeing somebody be like, that is messed up. That really helped me kind of like step back and be like,
isn't it weird? I think about this a lot, like gaslighting in general, or being, I don't know, just totally wrapped up in something. It could be not even religion, but just like, oh, wait, this isn't normal? Like, I thought everyone just felt like this. Like,
exactly. Like,
yeah.
And religious gaslighting is like a totally different beast because it feels so right when you're in it. Like,
so righteous.
Yes, it feels like God is saying this, or your leader is.
And how dare you question?
They're allowed to gaslight you, to keep you on the straight and narrow. And oh, like the things I had to unwind from, like, and just get out of my system after a program like that. And then just church in general. There was a lot of things that were kind of embedded between the two, but the program itself had a lot of weird gaslighty things that took me a long time to shake off.
Yeah, I constantly, and I think that was kind of our connection talking about this, like growing up in the Catholic Church, like that was so, like unwinding that, like realizing a lot of that gaslighting that occurred. I'm still like unpacking that, I think.
Oh, I'm sure you are.
Implicit biases I have, or like internalized, the jokes of Catholic guilt.
Yeah.
Those pieces that you're like, oh, that's what this is, this inner dialogue of I'm bad.
Yes.
And I deserve punishment.
All the time.
Yeah.
Like, it's almost like bad in the evangelical world or in maybe the Catholic world. Like, if you're not struggling with something, like there was something wrong if you weren't struggling with something, or if you weren't working on being better. Like if you weren't somehow broken enough.
I've been telling my friends, this is like kind of like this, but like, I'm like, at what point are we not working on something? Sometimes it's exhausting, just constantly like, I mean, we see this as therapists too.
All the time.
With clients, like just being like, yeah, it's sometimes it's like, I've even tapped out of therapy currently. Just like, I want to go utilize the skills I've learned in this and not continue to just, I don't know.
Yeah, I think sometimes we need to not be working on stuff all the time. Like, we need breaks from that. And there's something about just being in the good too, which is something I'm discovering kind of right now in my life, is just enjoying being in a good place and not being in a high stress spot in my life or where there's lots of drama. Like, being calm is like a relatively new thing for me, and it's been really hard to get used to.
Yeah.
And yet so many other people who have not had a lot of religious trauma don't deal with that and have learned how to manage that. And here I am at 40 learning for the first time what it's like to just be calm. And it's wonderful.
I can super relate to that. For me, it's been like cutting people out. I don't know if that's like been a thing, which is hard.
Really hard.
As a helping professional, I wonder like if you have that.
Absolutely. I had really hard year in 2022. Lots of things happened, and it was just awful. And I went to a therapist retreat, and we were talking about late fees, of all things. Somebody was mentioning that like they
clients.
Really struggle with enforcing their late fee. And Bethany, the camp host, she was like, you better charge your late fee. That's a way you care for yourself. Like, if you don't charge that late fee, you might not be able to go to that doctor's appointment that you needed to go to. Maybe you needed to go to dinner with your partner to connect. Maybe there was a vacation that you've been planning for and now like you're going to be short. Like, charge your late fees. This is all about self-care. And I just had this epiphany about self-care. And I, as a therapist, I thought I understood self-care better, and I really did not. And I kind of utilize self-care as kind of like a once a month, like, I'm going to go get a massage. I'm going to go out with the girls. But I realized actually self-care has to be about my whole life, everything. The way I structure my schedule, where my office is and how my office feels, the people that I spend time with in my everyday life, how I care for my body, and not in like a weird diety culture way, but just like just how I take care of my body in healthy ways. And in every way I've had to figure out like what is self-care. And one of those ways was like eliminating some friendships and some family relationships that just brought a lot of turmoil to my life.
And was it during that period of time then, like in 2022, that you were like going through a hard time, and then also realizing that self-care piece of like eliminating?
Yeah, it like started happening in smaller ways, but like not all at once. It was there wasn't anyone like, I'm just cutting people out. Like, you're on the chopping block, everybody's gone. It was just kind of over time, progressively like evaluating some things. I blew up one of my own friendships, and because I was oozing out pain and I was not containing that in any way, and blew up a friendship. But later realizing like maybe that friendship needed to go. Maybe there's a reason why I blew it up, even if I felt sad about that and remorseful about the way it happened.
Yeah.
But yeah, over time there were some relationships that just kind of I needed to slough off, and it's been good.
Yeah. You said family too and other stuff. What other stuff have you like cut out?
Oh, so family has been really, really hard just throughout my life. Like my mom and I have always had a pretty rough time together. Like she's got her trauma, I've got mine, but sometimes like you need a parent who can be a parent and not like a peer in understanding trauma in your life. And she has some beliefs that are very different than my own, and we have boundaries that are different, and she did not want to honor my boundaries, and I was like, well, I am not willing to be boundaryless with you.
Yeah.
And so we haven't spoken since April of last year. So, and then my dad and I have a pretty fractured relationship. I reported a family member to CPS, and he was outraged that I would do that and cut off connection with me. So my parents have been kind of the harder ones, in that like you just don't expect that your parents will be the ones that like you've got to step aside from. But I've met, now having so many clients who maybe have had to be estranged from their parents, it makes sense in some ways. Like sometimes your parents aren't the healthiest people for you.
Oh, yeah.
And for a lot of people, honestly, I think that can be the truth.
I know that was one of the hardest things I first learned. Like I probably started going to therapy as a child, but then again when I went to college, like that was at the peak of some of my mental health like crises for myself. Like I didn't know I had ADHD, anxiety, PTSD. Like none of that was like normalized or talked about, and then it like really surfaced. I feel like, and you see that rise. I mean, that's when people get diagnosed with bipolar and schizophrenia, and like it's a big period of time in your early 18 to 20s. Yeah. And one of the biggest things that I learned in therapy was that I could say no to my mom. Like that was just like unheard of.
Right? It's wild when you're taught not to.
Yeah, and it was like, oh, and I remember my therapist saying, you could just go have coffee with her. You don't even have to do these events. And I was like, wait, what?
It's like an epiphany. Like, wait, I don't have to willingly suffer. Okay. It was hard when I first started. I don't know about you, but like it was really hard when I first started setting up boundaries with my mom.
Oh.
It was like rage came out of her body. Like, and she interprets my boundaries as controlling. And I'm like, no, this is an invitation to have a better relationship with me.
Yes.
I'm not trying to control you. I'm saying, here's my fence around me. And I can let you into that fence. But if you just like trample in and decide you're going to do what you want, then we're probably not going to hang out, because you don't just get to do whatever you want. And that just like was something she just could not tolerate. I don't know how that was for your mom, but it's still kind of like weird. I would say this started probably when in my teen years, pushing back. And then it just like continued being like, this doesn't work for me. Like our interactions are very volatile and like explosive. And, but I think honestly, as of late though, I feel like she has done her like own work. Oh, good.
And I think that has changed the dynamic a lot, because like, as people who've gone to school for therapy and we're like immersed in that kind of framework all the time, like, I don't know, you're pushed to have to do therapy and your own work. I'm not saying that all therapists have done that, because that's a huge other problem. But
that is a huge problem. Therapists need to go to therapy. Like,
yeah, 100%.
If you don't, like, I don't understand.
Yeah. And because we're doing that work constantly and just immersed in it, I feel like it just changed who I was as a person forever.
Of course.
And you can't unsee it. Like once you're a therapist, you're like, oh, like the world just became so different to me.
Mm-hmm. Same. I remember telling my therapist, like, I could never not know what I now know about myself, can I? And she's like, no. And that's hard sometimes when like.
Better or worse? Like, here I am.
Like, oh, I now know this about my life, and I can't unsee it. I can't look away.
Yeah.
Because if I do, then it's just like putting myself back in that box that I was in before. But how could you just ever ignore it? Like, I don't know. I'm just not an avoidant person. So for me, it was like, I'm not prone typically to try to avoid the things that I can't see or don't want to see. But a lot of folks are. So
Yeah.
People do it, but I don't know. You have to confront those parts of yourself, and I hope someday that my mom can confront the parts of herself that can be great. She could be great. But the parts of her as a parent with me, they're just not great.
Yeah. And I wonder too for you, like that, the relationship to mom for them and what they have normalized, then I don't know, they kind of historically with us pass on some of the, like, I don't know, behavior or interaction they had with their own mom and unhealed
Totally.
trauma from mothers.
Totally. I used to just be all sorts of like emotionally all over the place. But I think I just kind of learned that like you could just be emotionally all over the place. And church emphasized that too.
That you couldn't be.
Well,
Or
for
it could
me,
be.
in my evangelical charismatic church world, emotional expression was valued.
Wow.
It was valued.
That is not Catholic.
No.
At all.
No, like emotional expression was very valued because it like gave you a sense of like they kind of saw it as like you're reaching out for God, you're having this experience. Of course you're crying every day. Like God's really working on your heart and changing you. And so like there was a lot of emotionality that whether it was real or not was a totally different story.
Yeah.
But so I was allowed to have emotion, which was helpful, but it was just always too much. And so I had to learn how to like harness that and contain it and be responsible for my own emotional world.
Yeah, I think that's hard. Like, that's so different than Catholicism. And growing up in my household, like, it was either you're silent or you're explosive. Like, I feel like there was really no in between, like, for spaces. It was like we're suppressing everything and then we're exploding.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, there was some of that. It wasn't so much silence. It was just more like, I'm mad, so somebody was reacting.
Well, yeah. I don't know if it was silent necessarily, but I don't feel like there was a lot of space for like sadness or like processing through that. That's still a huge trigger for my family.
That's unfortunate.
And I feel like the religion piece, it's interesting because my mom converted for my father. Like she wasn't part of Catholicism growing up.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So like, it's weird that her lens of like what Catholicism looks like in the household was just so, because as an adult learning it is different than like me from birth on. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's totally different. Like, I think people who come into their faith later on in life will always have a different perspective than those of us who were in it from like childhood. Because we didn't have a choice as children, so like we're hearing what's offered to us as if it's the truth.
Yeah.
And I think if you are an adult coming into your faith later, it's like, no, well, there's actually a lot of other truths out there. And like, it's not just this one thing. And so I think a lot of folks can like differentiate a bit differently if they've come into their faith later.
Yeah. I wonder if like, because we were like born into it, I'm more like adverse to it because I'm like, this seems crazy and I don't want to be a part of it. We're choosing it when all the options, all the different avenues for religion, like you're making a conscious decision to be a part where we didn't make that decision.
No. And it kind of begs the question, like if you've grown up in anything like long-term, whether it's religion or like a family system style or whatever it might be, like the question becomes to me, did you really actually have a choice if it was so formative and it was wrapped around every experience of your life? Like, I don't think it is a choice.
No.
I think choosing to leave is then probably the hardest thing you could ever do.
Yeah. It's kind of normalized with Catholicism that I don't know, I feel like people just are like, we're out of here. Like a lot of my friends, and it's just a lot. Well, they have that saying cafeteria Catholics, like people who just like show up on Christmas and are like picking and choosing. And Roman Catholics really do not like that. They're like, no, you're fully in or you're out, kind of like, but you're never out because you were baptized. So you're sworn in from that moment on. Like you are always Catholic.
So forever you will always be, whether you choose to be or not.
That's the belief.
That's really interesting.
Especially if you're confirmed. Like confirmation is that moment, which again, you're a child being told like, it's like playing volleyball or like basketball. Like you're signed up for this thing and you're doing it.
Right.
And that's what confirmation is. You're confirmed into Catholicism forever.
So I guess I wonder if then, like, and this is a real big theological question, then, like, so if you choose to quit being a Catholic, do you go to heaven or hell if you die? You know?
I mean, their belief is that on your deathbed, you can ask, like, to be back and, like, ask for forgiveness, and you're always like, welcome back, essentially.
Oh, how interesting.
Or at least that's how it landed for me growing up. It was like, oh, okay, like, I can just denounce, fuck this, I'm not doing this. And then on my deathbed, so that I get to go to heaven, I will ask for God's forgiveness for not partaking in religion my whole, like, adult life.
That is wild. I just feel like in any kind of religious space where it's like you have to be part of a membership to gain entrance into an afterlife, like, that just to me feels like that's a really fragile God if he needs, like, your buy-in to go somewhere that we don't even know exists. Like, I don't know. I just have a lot of, like, weird... I just feel like it's such a strange idea that, like, God would need us to believe in him.
Yeah, if I think about this a lot. I don't know if, like, I go to stand-up pretty regularly, and somebody was, like, talking about Mary last night on stage, and I have lots of different jokes about, like, Mary kind of bamboozling, you know, everyone possibly having an affair. This person's joke was that she was a lesbian, and that, like, Joseph is really a woman wearing plaid carpenter.
That's hilarious.
And Jesus was, like, adopted. Like,
oh my God, that's hilarious.
Mine is more that she was cheating, having, you know, side hustle with men, and then...
I mean, yeah, like...
convinced everyone that it was God's child, this illegitimate child.
It is
Jesus
such a
Christ.
bizarre idea to think about somebody becoming, like, conceived by the Holy Spirit.
But it goes back to what you were saying about God being so fragile. Because the way we portray Jesus to me, like, is so wild. Like, that God and Jesus are this judgmental. They need you to submit this hard. Because really, that's not how it was.
No.
According to their book, the Bible. Like,
yeah. I mean, I have all sorts of problems with the Bible, too.
Yeah.
Now, like, just the more I look at it, it's like the whole Old Testament is just about, like, genocide and, like, God giving them permission to go eradicate people groups and, like, colonize.
Yeah.
And that's problematic to me.
Very problematic.
Very problematic. Like, we see the devastation that happens with colonization and, like, genocide of people groups. Like, it's
what's
terrible.
happening in Palestine.
Exactly. And, like, it's just ironic that Israel is the one leveling all of this injustice at the folks in Gaza who are just trying to live their lives. It's ironic. But then there's the New Testament, which is, like, these stories that were written by people that didn't get published for like 100 years post Jesus. And then Paul, who wrote all these letters, and they were letters. They were not like, this is what God is telling us to do. And he told me explicitly, and you've got to do them now. These were like letters to people. And we bolster them up as if they're like, this is God's word. And there's a lot of problems in that.
It's like, no, it's your word. This
Exactly.
individual man. And again, white, well, they say they're white men, but they were not.
No, they were Jewish.
Yeah.
These were Jewish, like, dark-skinned Arabic men.
Yeah.
Who were in an extremely patriarchal society. Women had zero rights. Jesus was not a feminist. I just don't think that.
No.
Like, he was a Jewish man in the context of his culture. And he did not come to liberate women. And he didn't.
No.
So, I don't know. There's just all sorts of things when you look at it. Like, this was not a democratic person coming to save the world.
No. Absolutely not. Yeah. I wondered what you thought about that, like, liberation, or was that part of your process of, like, leaving your religion, or I don't even know. Did you leave your religion before I say that?
I did. Yes, I did end up leaving Christianity. Liberation is really interesting. Like, I like that idea. Like, I know there's the idea of, like, liberation theology that I think that's a Catholic thing that happened down in, like, Central America and Mexico. There are folks that really believe in, like, faith as it relates to the suffering of other people. And I read a book about that, like, somewhere along the way in my journey, and just thought that was really beautiful to connect a God who will show up for people in the midst of their suffering. That I thought was lovely. But that is not the whole of how people believe, unfortunately. So liberation for me, I guess, obviously, like, this is in my white evangelical context. And so liberation as a white person is just a different thing.
Yeah.
So I guess, yeah, do you like want to know the story of how I left?
Yeah.
All right. So I had gotten kicked out of my church, the one where I did the program, in 2011. And it was kind of wild. Like, the senior pastor sat down with me and was like, we believe God is unwinding your identity from Victory Faith. And I kind of like cocked my head back and I was like, oh, he's kicking me out. He's not going to say it explicitly, but that's exactly what he's doing. It's just planting enough doubt that I was allowed to be there anymore. And I was like, well, what if I want to stay? And he said, well, we'll have to do a lot of damage control. And I'm like, damage control? Like, all I did was set up boundaries and none of that was received well. And it was over stupid shit. Like, I wanted to date instead of do traditional courtship. I wanted the right to go out and drink because I was an adult with my friends and not have that questioned. I wanted to be able to, like, do whatever I wanted and believe the things I wanted to believe and question and just kind of engage the world in a different way. And that was not okay. So they kicked me out. And I was pretty devastated. After that, it was kind of like, how can that happen? How can a faith community that says we're your family, like we're in covenant relationship with you, how can they suddenly turn around and ask you to leave and have nothing to do with you ever again? Like, I lost all of my friends, all the people that I went to church with. Nobody sought me out. It took 3 years, I think, for somebody to even come to me and say, what happened? And I was like, are you kidding me? It just was so painful and so hurtful. So I had gone through my parents' divorce, had that breakup with my high school boyfriend. I did the program for 5 years. And then a few years later, they asked me to leave. And it was just like loss after loss after loss. So from there, all my beliefs were out on the table. I was like, I got to look at all of this. I got to examine and see what was just absolute bullshit and what was like actually something I believe in. So I started doing that. I left that church and then I kind of dabbled in a couple other churches for a little while. And I started just like, when I would go, I would eventually like have like almost like panic attacks going to church. Something in me was just like, it just didn't feel okay. And I could not put my finger on it at that time what that was because I didn't know what a panic attack was.
Oh, wow.
I just knew like my body was having a reaction that felt really weird. And like I'd get really hot or I would get like clammy or I just felt like I needed to run away and felt trapped. And nothing had actually changed except I had left that one church and I was at a different one. From there, I ended up at grad school in Seattle, and it was a really progressive evangelical school. So they had like a Master's of Divinity program for people who wanted to be pastors and then a counseling psychology program. And it was the most different experience I had ever had in my life. They just saw things differently. Even if they were unapologetically Christian, they invited doubt, which was something I had never experienced before. People saying like, okay, well, let's talk about it. Like, and at the end of it, if I was like, yeah, I just don't believe that. And they were like, okay. And just continued to be my friend after. And that was just wild to me that I could still be received and people could still like me, even if I didn't agree with them, even if I didn't believe the same things. And then I got exposed to different ways of believing things even. And it was really like, ironically, the New Testament professor that was doing her course on Jesus, and she had us read a book called The Misunderstood Jew. And it was all about the Jewishness of Jesus and how he was a product of his culture. And I was like, it was kind of just like, after all this stuff, I realized like American evangelical Christianity is fraudulent. And I cannot participate any longer in a system that has brought me so much harm, so many others harm, that is inconsistent, that is not lining up with what they say they believe, where there's too much hypocrisy, where there's abuses of leadership and power. All of it to me just was like, I can't do it anymore. And so I chose to leave. And I was really scared that like I would feel some kind of dread or like lightning would come from the sky. Like I was really afraid that if I was like, I am not a Christian anymore, that like something would happen, and then nothing happened. And I actually just felt better. And so that's kind of it. That's kind of what happened in a nutshell.
And then you left it, though, completely.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I no longer identify as a Christian. I just am me. I would say maybe more agnostic. Like, I wouldn't say I'm an atheist. I don't know what or if there's any one thing out there, but I do believe in energy. I believe like all of us are energy. The world is energy. And when we die, our energy just goes back into the earth. And so that's as far as I've gotten as far as like, I guess, a new belief system. But I just don't think I could ever believe in like a deity ever again, like an absolute authority on everything. That just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me either.
No, like it's just presumptuous, I think, that we could know the full truth about what's going to happen when we die, or who God is, whoever we call that to be. You know, it just is presumptuous. Like, how could we ever know that?
Yeah. There's just so much about it that I think about all the time.
Yeah.
Like answering to a man is definitely not preferred for me either.
No, like who says it has to be a he?
Yeah.
Maybe it's a they. Maybe
I've always seen, it's funny you say that because in my mind, there was no gender associated with God.
No, I don't know.
Even though they make him.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's just a result of like a patriarchal culture that identifies with their own maleness and wants a God that's male. I'm reading a really great book right now called Jesus and John Wayne.
Oh.
It is fascinating, and it's really like talking about a lot of this, like how the evangelical church came to want to replicate a God that looks like this very masculinized version of God. Like he's very patriotic and like he's like a guy that goes to war, and like, I don't know. It's just really interesting.
Yeah, I talked a little bit about this on like my individual episode, like introducing this, but that was probably one of my favorite parts of Catholicism was like worshiping women,
Mm-hmm.
which isn't a lot of Christianity. Mary, is very much worshipped.
Yeah. And that's a part of Catholicism I always struggled with when I was in my evangelical world, was like, it was just like so heretical in my mind. And now I'm like, well, maybe they had an understanding of something that we didn't.
Yeah,
they
about
included
women.
Mary as like being important.
Yeah. When you think about like Mother Earth or women, mothers, bringing life onto Earth, like why wouldn't the woman be the one worshipped?
Right. Right. Like why wouldn't she be a pivotal piece of this? Like she was 14 years old.
God, was she?
Yeah.
I must have blacked that out of my memory.
My God, they like married women so young.
They definitely, in the children's, so we took religion as like a class every year, all religions in Catholic school, but that was definitely not part of the video telling us she was 14.
Sure.
I
don't know where
remember
I learned
this
that somewhere, but I believe lots of like Jewish women were married very soon after they had like their period.
I mean, it makes sense in that time. Like, why would a woman be like an adult?
No, there was no like purity culture kind of thing where it's like you got to just wait till you're married to have sex. It was more like you're being given away. You don't even get a choice in who you're marrying. Good luck. Have fun with that.
Yeah, 100%.
So she didn't really have a choice. Like,
no,
I don't think she chose to marry Joseph or whoever she was with.
Yeah, in my mind, I don't know why I made up this story at such a young age, but I was like, oh, what? How did she get pregnant? I'm so confused.
Well, it is confusing, right? Like, God just magically came down and like put a baby in her belly.
It's kind of like the old stork, like dropping off the baby at your doorstep. Totally. That they try to convince you these women are not having sex.
Right. It's not happening.
Yeah.
They are totally pure.
Yeah.
It's just so wrong.
I think about this a lot, just about women in general and their sexuality, but in religion specifically. Even this community in our jobs, like, just as a woman speaking about sex or gender, like how frowned upon it is. Like,
oh my God. It's really hard to talk about it. Like, I can't tell you how many of my clients struggle with their sexuality because they've had lots of either trauma around it or they've been told not to engage in it at all. It's sobering, like the ways women get shit on for having sexuality. Like, it's painful.
The shame. like around it, and all of these things that lead us to therapy, which I believe deeply that that's the biggest, like shame internalized, like is what makes us mentally ill.
Oh yeah, shame is huge. Like our bodies have like it's interesting. So like in our lives, like we've got like I kind of how I frame this to clients is like we've all got our emotions kind of running on a highway, and they're like going east, west, you know, like up and down. They're doing their thing. I said, but shame has a totally different freeway system in the body and in the brain. Like it's not on the same level as like your normal emotions. Like it has its own roundabout you get on, and then there are all the signs telling you how worthless you are along the way and who you're supposed to be and who you're not. And until you can find a way to get off on an exit, like it's just going to have its way with you. And shame is just nasty.
Yeah.
You know,
we see it all the time.
All the time.
Even within myself. Mm-hmm. That's what I was saying with like Catholicism, that guilt or shame, the differences between guilt and shame. I think what I thought was guilt is really shame, or vice versa. Like just those words being kind of overlapping and the meanings of them. But I know what we were calling, oh, you're having Catholic guilt. It's like, no, I'm having shame. You're shaming me.
I'm
like,
having a shame response.
Yeah.
Right now.
To what, and with human sexuality, one thing that really bothered me about Gonzaga's, what mental health program did you go to?
It was called the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology.
That's where you got your mental health from? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a very wild place. It's just different.
Yeah, I've never even heard of it.
Oh yeah, it's pretty cool. Like there are things, like all places are going to have their things, but it did give me a lot of room to just find myself and then to eventually abandon the things that weren't a part of me anymore.
Yeah. I don't know how your program like approached human sexuality, but I was super disappointed in Gonzaga.
How did Gonzaga structure it?
Well, it's its own class. It's just like once a week. I can't remember. It was a really weird, not partial credit, but it was like I don't know. It wasn't like our normal scheduled classes. Like it was like an add-on.
Oh.
And what I thought was super disappointing about it was the entire class is about relationships and marriage, not about sex or human sexuality, about gender or all these different things that are way more magnified now that we can talk about and see. And I mean, just so different than like even while I was at Gonzaga, was it 2012 to 14 was when I was in my grad program. But it pissed me off because I was like, human sexuality is such an important piece of humans. Like we're
Agreed.
missing a huge piece of humans here.
Oh yeah. Like mine was, I'm trying to think back now. Mine was kind of fucked up also, if I'm honest.
Yeah, it's like really, and especially being a religious affiliated program, like how far are they going to go into sexuality when they don't see it as normal or normalized, even though we know?
At the time, like we talked about it in just some interesting ways. Like one of the professors there, he just has his own belief system around it. So we talked about it in ways that were important to him and not like a broader theme of sexuality and like.
So his individual values or morals instead of like what is the overarching piece of human sexuality.
Yeah, like I would have loved to have talked about women's sexuality, like trans sexuality, like LGBTQ sexuality, like all of the ways in which a human gets to embody their sexuality. And that was not on the table. It was much more around like you said, kind of like relationships, maybe not as strictly as yours was, but like it just was not that. It was not what I thought it was going to be. I think I blocked it out because I just was like, this is bullshit.
Yeah, they actually had one time a human sexuality psychologist come in, like a guest speaker, but that was as deep as it ever got. And that was the most important piece of that class, was that day that she came in, because that was actual talking about treatment of sexuality and like healing human sexuality that have, been so shamed deeply into it.
It's all coming back to me
Is
now.
it?
Like my sexuality class was more about like sexuality disorders, like voyeurism and exhibitionism and
like kinks or no, or
not really
not
kinks,
even kinks.
No, it
just
was
like the dirty parts
the
of sex.
dirty parts of it, like the disordered parts.
That
of
is
it.
weird. Gonzaga did a similar thing, and they had us present. And I remember I was so triggered by how they framed it like that. Like
Right.
only the shame pieces of sexuality or the naughty, bad, like
Mm-hmm.
in there. And again, based off their lens, not that it really is dirty or bad, but just the way it was framed to us is like, let's talk about the disordered parts of sexuality.
There was a book we had to read in ours at the time. I don't know if they're doing it now, but I remember it was called Female Perversions. I literally chucked the book across the room and I was like, I'm not fucking reading this. Like, don't care. It made me so angry that like, we're just going to talk about the ways in which women are perverse in their sexuality. And I just like, I'm like, who the fuck chose this book? And it was the professor that talked about sexuality in the way that was important to him. But yeah, like why do we only talk about the ways in which it's unhealthy or bad, you know?
Yeah, instead of like, how do we normalize your experience in healthy ways? Like that connection to self or others and what that means to you and safety and consent and
Right.
like, and just like the pleasure piece of it and the exploration of it.
These are all things I've never had conversations around in like a more academic way. Like, so I went to private Christian school growing up, and my sex ed class, I shit you not, was just don't have sex. Wait till you're married.
Yeah.
That was it. Like there was no, I didn't learn about STDs. I didn't learn about AIDS. I didn't learn about how my equipment worked. Like nothing. I didn't learn about condoms. And then I get into college, and I'm a little bit older at this point, and then I go to grad school, and we're still not talking about the ways in which sexuality is good, you know? So my entire experience of sexuality, at least in terms of learning, has just been don't do it, just get married, and then you can explore it there.
And even that like is not going to be talked about once you're married.
No.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about like issues that come up within your sexuality in a partnership.
No, and when you have to, it's like really fucking awkward. You know, like I didn't know consent was a thing, I think probably till grad school, if I'm honest.
Like, I don't even know that I knew about it in the way that I do now.
Mm-hmm.
Like the way that even in our culture, not even just because of like being in Catholic school, but just how we talk about consent.
Right.
Yeah.
That was not on the table. Like, I don't think my parents ever talked to me about consent.
No.
Like, there was no sense of like, you don't ever have to do
It's
anything.
just straight up, you're not
be.
having it.
Yes. Just don't do it. Like, and then they'd shame you if it was happening instead of like wanting to understand. Well, let's talk about what that means, you know?
Yeah.
There was none of that.
I think that's one of the things that I was so drawn to when I got to, so I went to Catholic school, then I went to public high school here in Spokane. And I was so drawn to Planned Parenthood and like really partnering with them as a high schooler, like passing out condoms for them in my high school. Or, I was just so like, I want to know about this. Like, speaking of liberation, like about my body and consent, but I didn't know it was consent at that time. But like, what does that mean? Like to know my body and, just exploring sexuality. And now as a counselor and therapist, like getting to have those conversations even with students, or like Spokane has been very controversial around human growth and development curriculum coming out here, because now trans and queer are present in the curriculum, which is super important.
100%. It needs to be.
And just sex being normalized, that, or masturbation or whatever, like is not a thing that you and I obviously experience.
Nope.
And then you think about where I just wondered too, that this just popped in my brain, like how, because it wasn't normalized, the more likelihood that we're going to step out on partners or do things because we can't speak of it. Like even in relationships in a healthy way, like, I don't know, just all the things that become like, I don't know, just unsafe or bad or more likely because I feel like you can't talk about it.
Well, and I think when you can't talk about it, you can demonize it or make it like somebody is other when they're doing something that you're not familiar with. And when you can other somebody and objectify them in that way, then you're a little bit safer in your own little incubated world of what you know about sexuality. But the truth is, like, there's not one truth about how people get to experience it, because all bodies are different and all bodies experience sex in different ways. And I think that was the biggest revelation that I ever experienced, was that it's not just about penetration. It's about all parts of what it means to be embodied in yourself and with another human, and inviting them to do that with you. Like it's not a one size fits all kind of experience.
Yeah.
And I think, largely in our community here, there is a lot of othering of people when it's like, well, that's not what I believe about this. And so we just need to not do it. And it's like, well, why can't we just talk about it? Why can't we just engage in a dialogue about it?
That's one of my biggest fears of even running this podcast as a counselor in our community. Just being like, oh, if you say this out loud, how will you be reprimanded for this? Instead of like, hey, we can talk about this. We are talking about this, though, behind closed doors. So why can't we talk about it publicly or disagree? Like, maybe we don't see this the same, and it's okay.
And it's okay. Like,
instead of it, now we're just so divided, and you can't have any, like, you're dead to me.
like, we don't all have to be the same, and that can be beautiful and actually is more rich when it's not all the same. Like if we all have different nuances in how we see things and how we want to talk about it, like, and we still don't have to agree.
Yeah.
And that can be just fine and actually really enriching when you meet somebody where you're like, well, that is an interesting perspective, and walk away being okay with each other. And I just don't know why we can't get there as a community. Like,
yeah, country community. It's just interesting. It's like, the wars that are happening, like, it's just, I can see the world different than you, and it's not going to harm you.
No.
Yeah.
No, and I think people just, when they don't understand, they get afraid and they like to resist.
Oh, I've seen it big time. I mean, in my job specifically in public ed, that's a very common practice, and just in our, I don't know, community, like, this scares me, so we're just not doing it.
Yeah.
Even if it's something that's beneficial to humans.
Exactly. Like, fear is a really interesting tool. And so much of our world, like, we make a lot of decisions on fear. And I think that's really tragic. Like, we shouldn't be making decisions out of fear. Like, there are better places we can get to and make decisions out of, like, there's a difference between making a decision out of fear and out of safety.
Yeah.
Those are very different.
And I think we confuse them a lot.
A lot. Even therapists do it. I'll watch therapists who make decisions about their practices or about the clients that they work with based on either fear or safety, and they conflate the two often.
Yeah, they do.
Sometimes I'm like, wait a minute, why didn't you get more curious about this instead of just terminating with that person? And they're like, well, it freaked me out. And I'm like, well, then go to therapy and do work around that. Like, explore it. Don't just shut it down.
One of the biggest things that I've been working through is safe and discomfort. Like, for myself, like, having trauma, going through a pretty abusive relationship, and then trying to date. When things cause discomfort, I'm immediately triggered to safety. I'm like, oh, this is unsafe. This is unsafe. And I'm like, is it unsafe, or are you just uncomfortable?
Yes, exactly. I literally had this conversation with a client the other day. Like, they have lots of chronic trauma, and we were talking about meeting new people and being friends with them. And they're like, oh, it just like makes all my hackles go up. And I said, well, is it that you're unsafe or that you're just uncomfortable? And they like had never considered that there was a difference.
Yeah, you really get locked in that mindset, especially an anxious brain, PTSD, like, oh, wait, this is it could be triggering something, but truthfully, I'm just uncomfortable and I feel my body. You're like, embodiment, disembodiment stuff, like just not being attuned to our bodies, like, because I can be like, this is really uncomfortable for me and I am safe.
Exactly.
But like when you're so disembodied, like you're just fight, flight, off the chart, like you do feel that. You're like, I'm unsafe. I'm like a panic attack.
Exactly.
Like that exact response can happen from something so minuscule because you are not embodied.
And I don't think TikTok has done us any favors. Like people sharing all of their stuff about their triggers, and like now we have all these buzzwords, and it's like,
oh, they love it.
Man, it's really hard when a client comes in now and they're
another expert over.
They're an expert of, all the things that are psychological. And I will always say they're an expert of their own journey.
Yeah.
But sometimes they're bringing in language that has been fed to them through a media source, and then we have to kind of unpack that. But like, it's often like, I think helping people work through trauma really has been the work of like helping them learn the difference between this is a trauma response.
Yes.
And this is you now understanding that that's a trauma response. And now this is just uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
they're not the same thing. And you actually can tolerate it. You can do that.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have to run away.
No.
What happens if you stay?
That's been a huge thing for me. I'm a runner. That's like that was never my like response to a trauma response to me. It was fight or like freeze. Or no, sorry. Yeah, fight or freeze. Now it's like, oh, I'm getting the hell out. Like, I don't even want to see this. I'm done. Even when it's not actually what's happening, like it's discomfort. It's like you're uncomfortable and you're running. Like,
I wonder why that changed for you.
oh, this happened actually last night. I like lit a dude up at the bar or at this comedy night. This
I
comedian,
wish I could have seen that.
this comedian, you'll love this because this comedian and I have had so many issues in the community, and it's only been, this was our third blow up, but our first blow up was because I wouldn't move from one seat to another. Like I was sitting up at a bar and he wanted me to come into the crowd area, and I was just like, no, thank you. Speaking of consent,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't do it, and then he was very upset that I wouldn't do it and kept pressuring me like, no, you're gonna move. You're
Why?
gonna move. Yeah, it was.
Oh, he decided to flex on you.
So last night when I saw, then he went on a smear campaign behind my back, like telling everyone how big of a bitch I was.
What?
Yeah, and I could hear him, and I turned around and this was the first time, this was a while ago, I said, oh shit, I won't jump for the white man. The patriarchy's telling me to jump and I won't do it. So I went into fight, which was interesting. And then we've had some other weird interactions. Like he roasted me on stage, calling me a fucking bitch and stuff. Like this is why I talked about this on my first podcast, but I didn't talk about like the reason that I avoided this. Like I said, there was some people kind of coming at me in that community. And then this last night, literally, my other friend wants us to like record it, like him and I debriefing with this person that I'm having this.
Ooh.
Yeah. But you'll love this because somebody threw in that I was like a therapist last night. Okay, well, let me back up. So he does this stand-up thing. He's talking about loving bitches or something on the side, like, or said something to that effect. And I said, you don't like women. You hate us. And then, and he got so pissed.
And there it is,
off.
folks.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah. And he said, and was like, why are you saying take that back what you said about me? And I was like, absolutely not. Somebody hurt you. A woman must have hurt you. And he just couldn't tolerate it.
Well, you called him out. Like he was trying to take his pain and make it into something funny, but then like you're having this terrible experience with him and he's like outright like abusive in his language.
And he's talked about raping women, locking them in chains on stage.
What the actual fuck?
And I said, yeah. And then so somebody brought in because they're like, he has autism. And I said, that does not excuse this behavior, friend.
No.
I was like, even as a mental health professional, I would confront you in session, wouldn't you? I mean,
100%.
I'd
be like, well, I'd be like, why do you think that's appropriate?
Yeah, shaming women publicly or like coming for them. I don't even know where I was going with that, but essentially like just seeing, I don't know, it's just so interesting.
Well, we were talking about our like fight, flight, freeze response.
Yes.
And then
last night I went into fight. And I hadn't seen that part of me in a while. I've been a really big runner, so I think
that felt good.
Yeah, I was like, I'm gonna tell this guy in front of everyone, this is bullshit, and I did it. I was just like, I'm not gonna back down, and I'm gonna show this anger and frustration with this human for doing this. But also, I think to your question about when that changed for me, I don't know, it was relational, like partnerships. I've been a runner.
I could see that. Like we all have our different responses to different people and in different ways for wildly different reasons. Like I typically go into fight also. And sometimes that's helpful. Sometimes it's not. But sometimes I just straight up freeze. And I'm not really a runner, but I am more of a freezer, like where I shut down and I can't think. And I just kind of melt into the floor. And I hate those moments. I hate it.
Me too. I wondered as a therapist, do you ever feel like we just have to be like perfect? Like I can't lose my shit on people, or like I have to be this like.
No, not anymore.
Okay.
No, we're just people at the end of the day.
That's what I was trying to tell people last night. Afterwards, like I'm calm, cool, and collected. Like when I'm having to co-regulate a student or whatever, but in my real life as a human being, like I'm gonna be 100%.
Sometimes we lose our shit.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have fights with our partners, you know? Like,
yeah.
sometimes we're not the best versions of ourselves because we're just human beings at the end of the day. And, like, as much as you have all the knowledge of something, like, your body still does exactly what it perceives it needs to do when it feels threatened or unsafe, you know?
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of training to, like, constantly be okay all the time. Like, I don't know that, like, that's possible. Like, that's just not human if we were always put together. And I'm just not of the persuasion that, like, I need to be anybody other than myself anymore. Like, I can be professional, but at the end of the day, like, the work we do is very relational, and there are going to be bumps even in that. And so I don't know, what is professionalism as a therapist? And I don't know. And in other contexts, I'm just going to live my life.
This is actually a perfect segue to, like, I always have the guests say, like, words of, I don't know, wisdom, or, like, because you kind of just said it, like, just being nobody but yourself. Mm-hmm. But what would you kind of wish for the Spokane community, or?
Oh, I wish a lot of things for the Spokane community. I wish Spokane was not so polarizing. I wish we could have more conversations, more dialogue, more, I wish people would not be so ugly at times towards each other. Man, there's a lot that I wish for Spokane. But I think when I think about the community of Spokane as a whole, we're a highly religious community. And within that, there are some nuances. But yeah, I just wish we could come to the table with more humanity towards one another. And just to say, like, we have some disagreements about how we see the development of Spokane, how education should go, how business should go, and can we respect all points of view, whether or not I like them.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to end the episode, because I think that is kind of like why I guess this podcast exists now for me, is just hearing from people in Spokane who have varying opinions or differing from me. I haven't had anyone really like oppositional of me yet on here, but I think about that, like differing, but all of us are different.
All of us are different, and I think that can be beautiful. But, you know, if you never get there and you're just an echo chamber in your own little world, like, you'll never have another opportunity to have a different perspective.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was awesome to like get to know you deeper than just at Radio Bar.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is our favorite.
Our Radio Bar conversations.
Yes. And also I want to plug your Instagram and your socials so that, like, you know, if that gets you a publisher, let's do it.
It can't hurt. It can't hurt. You can find me on Instagram at Jaqs, Jaqs 1983. Facebook, I don't know what my handle is on Facebook.
Just your full name, probably.
Just Jacqui Nelson.
Yeah.
You can find me on there.
Do you have a name for the book?
I have a name, but I'm not pleased
You're not
with it.
Okay.
It's not quite
there.
My favorite. Right now I'm calling it Faith Betrayed, Escaping the Cult of Discipleship.
Ooh.
But I'm really open to another name. I don't know. It's just...
I like that title.
Oh, well, that's good.
It lands well.
I've just been in my book so much that I'm just kind of like, I'm over my own book. But yeah.
All right.
Hit me up if you have questions about my book or my work as a therapist, or if you just want to have a conversation.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And thank you, Spokane, for listening. And I'll be back soon, and you can hear the podcast on any of the major platforms. Thank you.